"What's your rank?" my dad asked with a laugh. The entire table chuckled with him. I reached into my purse, pulled out my government ID and slid it across the table. At first, nobody cared. Then my dad's friend Rick grabbed it. Rick was a retired Navy SEAL, a man who had spent 20 years serving his country, a man who almost never looked surprised. The second his eyes landed on my credentials, his face drained of color, his chair scraped backwards so hard it nearly tipped over, his hands started shaking. Oh my God, the room went silent. Rick looked at me, then at my father, then back at me. "No way," my dad laughed. What is it?" Rick swallowed. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded completely different. "She reports directly to the president." The entire room froze, and suddenly nobody was laughing anymore. The crazy part, that wasn't even the biggest secret I had been hiding. A few hours earlier, I had seriously considered never speaking to my father again. Growing up, I was never enough for him. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old. And for most of my life, my father treated me like a disappointment, especially compared to my older brother, Jake. Jake was everything Dad wanted: football player, popular, loud, confident. The kind of guy who walked into a room and immediately became the center of attention. I was different. I liked books, computers, math, quiet places. Dad used to call me the invisible child. At first, I thought it was a joke, then I got older and realized it wasn't. When Jake scored a touchdown, Dad invited the entire neighborhood over. When I won a state academic competition, Dad forgot to show up. When Jake got a used pickup truck at 16, Dad called it an investment. When I got a full scholarship, Dad called it luck. Those things stay with you, even when you pretend they don't, especially when they come from your own father. My mother tried to balance things out. She always told me I was capable of anything. But she passed away when I was 20. After that, the distance between Dad and me became a canyon. I left for college, then graduate school, then government service. The less I saw him, the easier my life became. At least that's what I thought. The truth was more complicated, because no matter how successful I became, a small part of me still wanted his approval. A part I hated, a part that made me keep showing up. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, birthday parties, every single time hoping something would change, and every single time leaving disappointed. 3 months before the dinner where Rick nearly fell out of his chair, Dad called me unexpectedly. That alone was unusual. He rarely called. "Jake needs help," he said. Not hello, not how are you. Just Jake, always Jake. What happened? He wants to start a business. I already knew where this was going, and he needs investors. There it was. I almost laughed, not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. Dad had spent years acting like my career wasn't important, but somehow he always remembered I had money. How much? 200,000. I nearly dropped my phone. Absolutely not. Silence. Then came the guilt. Family helps family. Funny, nobody ever said that when I needed help. I refused. Dad hung up angry. For weeks afterward, relatives started calling. Aunts, cousins, family, friends, all repeating the same story. Jake had a dream. Jake deserved support. Jake just needed one chance. What nobody mentioned was that Jake had already burned through 3 businesses: a gym, a landscaping company, an online store. Every single one failed because he treated planning like an optional activity. But somehow I was the villain, the selfish sister, the cold-hearted daughter. I ignored it. At least I tried. Then things got worse. A month later, I discovered someone had been digging into my personal life. At first, it seemed random. Questions from distant relatives, comments from people I barely knew. Strange assumptions about my job, my income, my security clearance, things I never discussed publicly. Something felt wrong, very wrong. I couldn't prove it yet, but my instincts were screaming. And my instincts were rarely wrong. A week later, I learned the truth. Jake had been telling everyone that my government position wasn't important. According to him, I was basically an overpaid administrative assistant, a glorified secretary, someone who pushed paperwork all day. Why? Because it made it easier to pressure me into funding his business. If people believed my career wasn't demanding, then I looked selfish for protecting my finances. The lies spread fast, and honestly, they hurt more than I expected, not because strangers believed them, because my own family did. Nobody bothered asking me, nobody wanted the truth. They preferred the version that benefited Jake. The golden child, the family hero, the guy who somehow never faced consequences, until the night everything exploded. Dad announced a large family dinner. Jake would present his business plan. Everyone was invited, including me. I knew exactly what it was, an ambush, but I went anyway. Part of me wanted to hear what they would say, part of me wanted proof. Mostly I wanted closure. I arrived 15 minutes early. Big mistake. The second I walked in, conversation stopped. The atmosphere felt strange, like everyone already knew something I didn't. Jake was smiling. Dad was smiling, and that worried me, because neither of them smiled when I showed up, not like that. The entire evening felt staged. People kept asking loaded questions, questions about money. Questions about investments, questions about my future. Then Jake stood up, raised his glass, and looked directly at me. That's when I realized they weren't asking for help anymore. They were planning something much worse, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go. Jake stood up and tapped his glass. The room went quiet. "I want to thank everyone for believing in my dream," he said. People clapped, then he looked directly at me, "Especially family. Family should always support each other." I immediately knew where this was going. Dad smiled. "Emily has done very well for herself." Several relatives nodded, then Jake pulled out a folder. "My investors are almost lined up." Something felt wrong, very wrong. Jake started passing papers around the table. People signed without even reading them, then one landed in front of me. I looked down, my stomach dropped. It wasn't an investment proposal, it was a commitment agreement. My name was already printed inside. According to the document, I had supposedly agreed to contribute $200,000 toward Jake's business. The room stared at me, waiting, expecting, pressuring. I looked at Jake. "What is this?" His smile never moved. "Just paperwork." "No, this is fraud." The smile disappeared. Dad leaned forward. "Don't make a scene." I laughed. For the first time all night, I actually laughed. "You're asking me to sign a document saying I promised money I never agreed to give." A few relatives exchanged nervous looks. Jake crossed his arms. "You can afford it." There it was, not a request, not a favor, an entitlement. He believed my success belonged to him. Dad stood up. "Everything you've achieved is because of this family." I felt something inside me break. Years of favoritism, years of disrespect, years of being treated like I mattered less. All of it hit me at once. "No," I said quietly. The room froze. "No." I looked directly at my father. "Everything I've achieved happened despite this family." Nobody spoke. Jake slammed his hand on the table. "You think you're better than us?" Before I could answer, the front door opened. Dad's old friend Rick walked inside, the retired Navy SEAL. The man Dad respected more than anyone. What happened next would change everything, because within minutes Rick would discover who I really worked for, and my family's entire plan would collapse.